Dylan Bain, welcome back to the show, brother.
What's up, Johnny?
Hello. And the reason for today's conversation, it wasn't even supposed to happen, really. You were going to be coming on in a few weeks' time, but I shared a post on my Instagram story, which to my um, uneducated in the financial way, I looked at it and went, "Oh, that sounds good." And it looks pretty as an Instagram post. I'll share it. It might be useful information to somebody. And not 2 minutes later, I receive a message from your good self going, there's a lot wrong with this post. It's not outright wrong, but it needs a lot more context. And you obviously explained it. And that post was about debt, which is this very vague monster, I would describe it as, especially if you're an 18-year-old. It's this behemoth that you know is coming, but it's unavoidable, and there's no training to deal with it. So I removed that post and went, well, actually, if that caught me out, how many other people is it catching out? So hence why we've invited you back on the show today to educate us and give us a bit of financial literacy, at least within this, at least within the minutia of debt. So um, take it away. From your perspective, define debt, so to speak, because to me, it's just this big, scary monster that we all have to wrestle with eventually.
Well, okay, so right off the bat, no, we don't. Right? Like right
Okay.
off the bat, there's already a societal expectation. And of course, I could be sitting here, spewing conspiracy theory about debt and societal expectation all day long.
Hmm.
But the reality is that we all expect debt, but we don't need necessarily debt. Okay.
Right.
But it makes a lot of sense if you have companies that are going to collect 14% interest on whatever debt you have. They want you to have debt. And and we'll get into why there's a lot of reasons why people want you to have debt. But let's just level set right there that out of the box, the expectation that you're bringing into this conversation is, I need to have debt. It's
Hmm.
going to happen. It's like the weather. There's nothing I can do to stop it, and nothing's further from the truth. Now, there's a huge question as to whether or not it's feasible to accomplish your goals in the time frames without debt. There's a question of, how can I leverage debt to my advantage? But whether or not you need it, let's just start there. You don't necessarily need it. Does that make
Okay.
sense?
No, that's fantastic. You've already kind of blown my mind because, for context, the reason I said that debt is unavoidable is I am in the fortunate position to own a house. I don't own it outright. Obviously, it's I'm paying a mortgage on it, but
Mm-hmm.
I know that's not a position a lot of people my age group are in. It's a nice problem to have. I have a mortgage to pay, but I feel like you touched on it there briefly about societal expectation. You know,
Mm-hmm.
you are expected at some point to settle down, to get the wife, the kids, the white picket fence, and own a house. Now, unless you are in an extremely fortunate position and wealthy and can just buy the house outright or build your own, fair play to you. But that's from at least my experience and the majority of the people I know, we don't have that luxury. So we have to go to the bank to get a mortgage. So that
100%.
that was the angle I was approaching from.
Yeah, and I have a mortgage on my house too, right? Like,
Mm-hmm.
let's just level set that. Like, I'm not living a debt-free life because I have a mortgage and I live in a high cost of living area here
Mm-hmm.
in the United States. But let's be honest, that was a choice we made,
Oh, 100%. Yeah, I made
right?
that
Like that
choice.
that's there's a huge difference between saying, well, this was unavoidable, I had to have a mortgage, versus, man, I could have modified a van and gone and lived in that.
Yeah,
And if you're
100%.
talking about having a wife and kids, like, there are people here in the United States right now who have bought school buses and have, a husband, a wife, and two kids living in a school bus, seeing the United States. So there are options. Like, but let's keep our sovereignty well in hand while we have this conversation.
100%.
Um, so your Instagram post was basically saying that there's this idea of good debt and bad debt,
100%.
and that's what I reacted to, because let's you asked me to define debt, so let's just define debt. Technically speaking, debt is somebody who loans you money that you are expected to pay at some future time, plus a premium called interest.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Or to put it another way, debt is somebody laying claim to your future production in life in exchange for money now.
Oh, right.
Okay. Those are, so I gave you a technical definition. So you take an accounting class, or you do a finance class. That's what they're going to tell you. It's money we give now with the expectation of paying in the future with a premium called interest. But in reality, money is what you exchange pieces of your only non-renewable resource, time, to get. And so if you are sitting there and saying, well, I'm going to take money now, that money represents pieces of time, pieces of your life that they're giving to you now that you have to give them in the future. So they have secured a claim on your future life and production. That's true for a
Wow.
mortgage company. That's true for a car loan. That's true for a student loan. It doesn't matter. That's what that is. And when
Right.
you start to think about that type of thing, you have a separate. Now suddenly one sounds, oh, okay, that sounds reasonable. The other goes, well, hold on a second. My life is mine to live. Not if you're in debt.
Right.
Not if you're in debt.
That's very true. Yeah.
I
Very,
mean,
very
stop and
true.
think about what in your situation. You have a mortgage. I have a mortgage. I don't believe you're married, but I have a wife and 2 kids and a roommate. Okay. I can't get up and walk away. So that debt, not only does the debt shackle me down because I can't just cancel my lease and go move someplace else. If
Mhm.
I had to move, I got to vacate the house. I got to get it sold. If it doesn't sell, I got to pay a mortgage plus rent someplace else. There's a big risk in even having a house. Economically, I've tied myself to the Denver metro area here in the United States, and I'm fucked if I got to go someplace else. I'm sorry, I don't know if I can swear on this
No,
podcast.
no, it's an easy going podcast. There's an
Okay.
when I post the episodes, it's like, does this episode contain explicit language? Like, yes, and about 90% of mine end up doing so. So crack on.
Yeah. So I mean, that's the thing to understand. And when you looked at this good debt, bad debt thing, mortgage debt was considered to be quote unquote good debt.
Mm-hmm.
Well, no, it's not. It's still debt. So really, the way it should say is there's horrible debt and not as horrible debt. Because
Wow.
honestly, if
Okay.
we want to have the maximum amount of freedom and sovereignty, you and I both need to pay off our damn mortgages so that we have the flexibility to actually live our lives for whatever might come, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that changes everything. Like that, I'm a little bit stunned, dare I use that word, that when you say horrible debt and less horrible debt, because I've just never heard it that way. Um, and I'm trying to like empathize and imagine if I was 18 and heard that, suddenly it's like, well, I don't know, from your perspective, what would you advise an 18-year what would you advise an 18-year-old or someone who's just entering adulthood who is gaining this perspective, but they want to go to university. They're obviously going to have to get student loans and debt. If like they're eventually going to probably want to own their own place, they're probably eventually going to want to have wife, kids, all that kind of thing. Um, it just seems to be in a strange way that if you want to live the average life, like have your fun certainly when you're young and then settle down, then it seems like debt is unavoidable, which you said obviously it is avoidable. But I don't know, it's almost, I was thinking about this before the episode, it almost seems like you're funneled into
Oh
debt
yeah.
by society. And I don't mean that society is there's some sort of secret meeting, right? How are we going to get all the kids into debt? But you
Oh,
know,
that's not true. That
oh,
meeting actually
all right,
exists.
okay. Have I opened
Okay,
the
so
can of worms?
yeah, no. See, like my biggest thing is I despise conspiracy theory.
Yeah,
Okay. And
yeah.
and when it comes down to conspiracy theory, like I just like this idea, like, oh my God, if we all wear masks, then pretty soon we're all gonna be, slaves in a boat somewhere or whatever.
Yeah,
Like
yeah. Nonsense.
big claims require big evidence.
Oh yeah,
Okay.
100%.
But when it comes to credit cards and debt, it turns out that there is big evidence. Like, let me give you a good example, okay, of the conspiracy to try to put people into debt. When I got to university, the first thing I learned about money is that money does not grow on trees, but credit cards do. Okay.
Bloody
So
hell.
I showed up to university, and the first day that I was there was Citibank, there was US Bank, there, Visa they had tents set up around campus offering credit card applications to freshmen.
Mm-hmm.
On the very first day that most of these people had ever lived separate from their parents, they're getting the
Yeah.
opportunity to put themselves into debt for
Mm-hmm.
24.5% interest. So
that run away with haste.
right. So now you're handing the opportunity to, they don't have cash, right? Now, but you're handing them a credit card to an 18-year-old who is now going through a huge emotional trauma, and moving out of your house, out of your parents' house, is an emotional trauma, right? It's a necessary one, but it still weighs on you. So you hand them a credit card, they're going to go out and party, and now and they don't ever have to emotionally lose the cash of actually giving up the cash and watching that cash stack dwindle down. They just forever can swipe that card.
Mm-hmm.
And I was one of those kids. And you know what? When I hit my credit limit, did they call me and say, "Hey, Dylan, you hit that credit limit"? Oh, hell no. They just raised the credit limit. By the time I was done with my freshman year, they had given me a $25,000 credit limit on a credit card.
That's insane.
It is insane, but it also is good business. If you're in the business of trying to collect interest rates, which is how those companies make their money, right? Then naive 18-year-olds is the best thing you could possibly go after.
Yeah.
Because
it's almost predatory in a way, isn't it?
Well, and of course, what's part of the sales pitch with that? Well, you want to get this credit card so you can establish credit.
You took the words out of my mouth. That was going to be literally the next thing. Surely this isn't good for your long-term credit score.
Well, but they sell it to you that way, right? So when you're 18 years old, just understand that like people, you are a fat, happy goose, and those wolves are coming for you. And it's going to be with that. It's going to be with everything. What the most common purchase for people to make out of university is? The number one most common purchase?
I'm not too sure.
It's a new car.
Oh, of course. Of course. Yeah.
So here you got some kids, at that point, you're what, 22?
Yeah.
You're coming out of university and you think to yourself, well, I'm now an adult. I got my first adult job. It's some low paying shit job somewhere. Right.
Mm-hmm.
But you got it out of college and you think I'm going to treat myself and get myself a car. And they buy a new car, like forgetting that new cars are horrible investments.
Oh yeah. 100%.
But like, stop and think about that for a second. If I were to go buy a new car right now, my new car would exceed at the largest I've ever paid for any student loans ever.
Wow. Okay.
Right. So your typical car in the United States is coming with, I think the average is about $375 a month for a depreciating asset that 90% of the time is going to be doing absolutely nothing.
Yeah. Yeah. Actually, when you think about it that way, yeah, that's insane.
Well, and so you stop and go back. So what advice would I give to an 18-year-old? The first is don't have a credit card. Like just don't do it. You can establish credit later, right?
Yeah.
You can always establish credit later. And if you really want to establish credit, just ask your parents to make you an authorized user on the card, because then you get their credit. So if your parents have been responsible with their credit, just get an authorized user on their card. That entire credit history is now going to come over to you. And so, if you're 18 years old, your parents don't even have to give you a card. You don't even have the option to spend on it, but you can do that. So you could be 18 years old with 25 years of credit history right out of the box.
That is very handy. Wish I'd knew that.
Right. So if the argument is we need to establish credit, there's that. Here's another way that people can establish credit, right? And credit card companies won't tell this. If you have a cell phone bill, like I have Verizon Wireless, and I've had Verizon Wireless for years at this point, but you can call them and ask them, hey, can you please report my payment activity to the credit bureau? And they will. And now if you've paid your cell phone bill on time, now you, without ever having to take on any debt, you now have a credit history and a good one at that. And you can do that with water bills. You can do that with all sorts of stuff that doesn't normally show up in a credit report. So the argument of trying to establish credit is just bonkers right out the box. So as an 18-year-old, understand that establishing credit is not necessarily as critical as everyone tells you it is.
Yeah, that's so interesting because I've never owned a credit card, and my credit score is, touch wood for now, outstanding. Because I until I owned my first property, it was my phone bill. That was probably the biggest expense I really had. And then certainly once I got my mortgage, and I've never missed a mortgage payment, touch wood again. But yeah, that built up my credit score. And it got to the point where at 28 I was thinking about getting a credit card, and then I thought about it. I was like, I've gotten this far without it. I don't really feel the need for one personally. I think that's something we could probably have you on again. I know we haven't even finished this episode. I'm talking about having you back on again, but maybe to do a whole episode dedicated to just credit cards and just
Oh,
that whole philosophy, because like we could talk all day probably about that, but within the scope of this conversation about debt, we've covered quite a lot in such a short amount of time, and I feel like that although we've defined it and we've said that you don't have to get into debt, but there is societal pressure. Watch out for these traps. With debt, though, and with the concept of good and bad debt, sorry, horrible and less horrible debt.
thank you.
Yeah. Even with that, do you still, is there any way that a young person, 18 up to uni age, could leverage debt to their advantage in any way? Or is it just, no, this is just going to be a thing of life that you just have to grin and bear, unfortunately?
So the first thing I'll say, and I've said this on this podcast before, you have to understand that we're talking about personal finance, and personal finance is always more personal than it is finance. Okay.
Yeah.
So flat out the gate, if you're 18 years old, understand that as you stepped into adulthood, you're carrying a whole bunch of shit with you. You don't know it. You don't want to know it. You don't want to look at it. But there's going to be some shit in your past and what happened with your parents, even if your parents were great parents. And that's going to carry through into your financial world. And when I do financial coaching, 9 times out of 10, it ends up in life coaching, which I actually just started a life coaching business because of that. It's because people will, for example, if your parents say, well, I can't afford, like, we can't afford this, right? And I've heard that I've been at the store and I've heard parents say, the kid says, I want a candy bar, right? Okay, so what's going on there? Psychologically speaking, the kid's excited about the candy bar. His brain wants the sugar so that he's being awarded for it. He thinks he's going to the person who is his provider, right? His parents, and going, I want this candy bar. And the parents go, no, put that down. We can't afford that. Now, first off, that we can't afford that is bullshit. We all know that that's bullshit, because I guarantee you we can go through that cart and find other stuff that they can afford that they probably shouldn't afford.
Yeah.
But from a kid's perspective, now they suddenly have they're built in a scarcity mindset. My provider cannot provide because we don't have enough money. Okay. That's going to set you up. So I'm using this as an example because I've seen it a lot. But when you come in at 18 years old and they hand you a credit card, you now have infinite access to avoid scarcity. You're going to start running away from that previous trauma.
Yeah.
And everybody has it, myself included. I grew up very privileged and I still had it. Right. So understand when you're 18 years old that these people who are peddling debt, they know this and they're going to use it to their advantage. So take some time to understand how your own relationship with money works. If you grew up in a place where we didn't have a whole lot of money, you're going to have some effects that you're going to have to work through. Now, that's a harder lift. So let's go to something a little bit easier. How do we in your place, deal with the societal expectations? I'm going to use student loans as an example, right? The United States, student loans are horrible. It's a racket. Okay.
Yeah.
So you have to start doing a cost benefit analysis, right? You need to start thinking about your life in a couple of different ways. If you're going to go take student loans, and this is I think the prime example, this is where people say that student loans are quote unquote good debt. They're defining good debt as debt I can use to make me more money than the debt I incurred.
Okay? Yes. Yeah. That's exactly the way I've always thought about it.
Exactly. Now, as a CPA, as a certified public accountant, and I work in the corporate world, there are times where I'll make a presentation to the board saying this is debt that we can't afford not to take on. Okay. I do make that statement professionally. After I have had an entire army of financial analysts and accountants that have crunched the numbers in every possible conceivable way to leverage all that expertise, that I'm sitting there with a report that gives me a 75% chance that this is going to work out.
Yeah.
The average human does not have access to those resources.
No.
Right. So now let's go back to the student loans example. if I just make a blanket statement, student loans are good debt, why wouldn't you want more of what you think is good?
Oh crap! Yeah, man, it's
So
like a war. It's like a war on words, isn't it? It's very tactical how it's used.
the whole thing is the whole go read a credit card agreement. You'll agree with me by the end of it, right?
Oh yeah,
This whole thing is like this is good debt is a marketing term. Why are you at university? To get a degree, to go pursue whatever, right? Whether it's your dreams, I want to be a great artist, or in my case, I just went because I wanted money, right? I took on student debt to get my CPA. I make far more than my student debt, right? For me, it was the quote unquote good debt. No, it was a necessary evil,
mm,
right? Because what ends up happening is you get kids who go into university and they say, well, it's good debt. So then they feel good about, well, however much they take. By the
yeah,
end of it, they end up with $100,000 in debt in a degree that they can't use to get a job.
yeah,
So
100%.
now they've mortgaged their future for nothing. Do you
Yeah,
see how that works?
yeah. It's pretty. It's almost, dare I say it, a bit scary. It's like if you when you're 18, it almost feels like, unless you have someone perhaps like yourself with people's best interests at heart, that they're almost like lambs to the slaughter. It's almost like a factory churning thing of, oh, here's a young naive people, and we're going to bag them for life and teach them that, or at least plant that seed that credit cards are good, and then once they're in, they're in. That it's so. I'm glad I managed to avoid that particular financial trap, but like straight out of school, 18-year-old, or even your 18-year-old self, what would you say to them?
What's
Um,
your plan?
oh,
That'd be what's your plan?
yeah.
And let me give you a great example. This is not somebody straight out of university, but
Mm-hmm.
I'll get the whole story. So my financial coaching practice, I live and die by referrals. Well, a
Okay.
friend, a guy I did a coaching session with, I helped him and his wife dig out of almost $250,000 in debt.
Oh, wow.
He recommended me to this other woman who then paid for my sessions on behalf of her son.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. And I sat down with him, and he had his undergraduate degree was in I think broadcasting or something like that.
Right.
But he had decided that he wasn't getting any money. He didn't have a good job. He could barely afford to pay his student payments, and so he had decided to go back to school and get a master's of fine arts, an MFA. And
Right.
his mother had decided that she wasn't going to stop him because she didn't think she could convince him, but she could pay for me to try to convince him.
Mm.
And so we sat down, and the first thing I asked him with was, and then what? You go get this MFA, and then what? Well,
Mm.
it'll help me be more competitive in the job market. Okay. Who has the job you want? How did they get there? Does this MFA really help you, or does it just put you further in debt? And the answer, of course, is it just puts them further in debt.
Yeah.
To get a master's of fine arts, and I'm not shitting on the arts by any extent. I'm just being realistic about what this is, right? Your master's of fine arts, and universities know this. So they offer all these certificates, which are not actually great in the job market. They offer all these master's degrees, on the promise that it's going to help you get a job, and that's bullshit.
Mm.
you know and so this guy's going to go back and incur another $60,000 in student debt that he can't discharge in bankruptcy on a degree that isn't going to put him any further up the Starbucks chain than he is currently.
Sorry, I don't mean to laugh, folks. I'm not looking down anyone on Starbucks, or if you're in the arts. It's funny, and it's true though, isn't it?
Well, but he was like, well, but I mean, this is good debt. I use it to make money. And I was like, your previous debt isn't making money right now either. So if you're 18 years old and you're going to school, my question to you would be, what's your plan? Well, I'm going to go
Yeah.
study psychology. This is the one that makes me go bonkers. Do you know how many psychology degrees universities manufacture on a yearly basis? It's huge. Do you know how much?
Right.
You know what the average starting salary for someone with an undergrad in psychology is? $25,000.
Yeah. That's
Why? Because almost all of them go work at Starbucks
yeah.
or equivalent. And so if I got a student who's just come out of just starting a university, they're going to incur student debt, then they're going to go into psychology. I'm going to ask them what's their plan. If their plan isn't, I'm going to finish this undergrad and then I'm going to go do a master's degree and then I'm going to get my PhD so that I can actually practice as a psychologist.
Yeah.
If their answer is anything other than that, the answer is don't go to university. You haven't figured it out yet.
Yeah. Yeah.
You know,
100%.
go do something else.
I think
Until you have a plan. Until you have a plan.
Yeah, 100%. Well, I think my brother accidentally did that. He straight off the bat did not want to go to university, and then decided actually it would be better if he did go to university. And to be fair to him, now he's a design engineer and manufacturing custom forklift trucks for this big company. So in that case, it worked out better for him. He did take a step back and think, what did he want to do? And got his ass into gear, worked hard, and now he's doing quite a good job. Unfortunately, there's a lot of people who I feel like go through the motions because it's what's expected of them to go through school. Unless you're going to go into a trade, go through school, go to university, get a job, have your fun, finish uni, settle down, get the house. And it's like suddenly, you've got a mortgage and then you've got your student loan debt. And it's just, and then you'll probably have debt from your car and then you'll have debt from, here, there, and everywhere. It's just, it seems like it just seems like it's this quite insidious monster, quite frankly.
Well, it's a societal expectation. Okay. Now, let me try to unpack that psychology here for a second.
Yeah, please.
Okay.
You're very good at this. You keep reading my mind. I'm just gonna what I want to ask you next.
Yeah. So I pulled up the Instagram post that you had, right? I went and found the original where it came from.
Yeah.
Because you did pull it down. So examples of good debt are mortgage debt, education, business ownership, and investing/loans.
Yes.
Okay. Let's just stop and think about this. The investing loan. Mm-hmm. Okay, let's just talk about how that goes. What you do with that is you're going to take that loan. I get it from wherever, and I then go and buy assets that I consider to be an investment, whether it's real estate, stocks, bonds, cryptocurrency, whatever.
Mm-hmm.
The bet you're making is that asset's going to appreciate more than the loan will.
Yeah, and
this is called margin. Okay. Especially if you're doing it in stocks, if you have the Robinhood app and you're trading stocks and you're getting GameStop because you're on Reddit and they're all telling you to go all in and have diamond hands on whatever stock, Robinhood makes it really easy for you to buy on margin. And that's great because if you stop and think about it, if the stock does explode, you bought more of it on margin and the stock went up, but the loan stayed static. And so you make buku bucks. Mm-hmm. And there are people who do that. I know people who've done that. I know people who are millionaires because of that. I also know far, far, far more people who are in bankruptcy because of it.
Yeah.
Okay. And so, this gets, other phrases you'll hear. You got to spend money to make money, right? I'm leveraging, right? No, you're, the next statement people say is I'm leveraged to the eyeballs. And that's where this happens because the payoff could be huge. But what they don't tell you is this is a high risk, high return type of thing. But because it's high risk, so few of us are actually going to make it. We as humans tend to overestimate our abilities and underestimate our risks. And it's a huge problem. Let me give you another great example. If somebody's kind of saying, well, I took out a loan to buy Bitcoin, what I hear is I took out a loan to buy lottery tickets.
Oh,
if you hit it, it's going to be huge. But what's your chances of hitting it? Pretty small. And let me just put this in perspective, right? People buy lottery tickets. It's the stupidest thing in the world. On average, the average lottery ticket, and you got to remember there's a huge payoff for one ticket and nothing for everything else. So we're talking about it's weird math. But the average return is 70 cents on the dollar. If you want to buy a lottery ticket, just give me the dollar, I'll give you 80 cents and you're ahead.
Yeah.
Right? And this works for both of us. So why not? Oh, because they want the chance for the big payoff. Because they saw that guy with 15 seconds on the evening news of, I had this life-changing amount of money. I got $1 million, blah, blah, blah. But what they don't see, or what they don't calculate for, is that, we're all looking at the one success who gets 15 seconds. If we gave 15 seconds to everybody who failed in that same experiment, you'd have to watch TV continuously for 25 years.
Oh, wow.
Now stop and think about those numbers for a second. 15 seconds for every failure calculates out to about 25 years for every single lottery. And the reason I'm bringing this up is that we're not talking about lottery. We're talking about loans. We're talking about good debt, quote unquote. Well, that's because we all see the guy who succeeded. We don't see the guy who failed. And there's a ton of them.
Yeah,
One of the other
that's
things
not good
about
Instagram stories.
exactly who gets on Instagram and be like, yeah, I just lost my house and I'm homeless now. Like nobody does that. And the algorithm doesn't choose that person because it doesn't get a bunch of clicks. Right. So we, between social media, the evening news, your information feeds are curated, no matter who you are, and it's not going to pick the losers. Another thing that they say on this good debt thing is business ownership. Oh, I got to take out a big business loan. Do you know that 70% of all small businesses fold within 12 months?
Oh, didn't know. I was not aware of that statistic. No.
Oh, yeah. The ones who succeed do really, really well.
Yeah.
But 70% of them will fold within the first year. The number one reason they fold in the first year is they are over leveraged.
Oh, right.
That means they have too much debt. These people launched a business and they ended up having to make debt payments that cut into their profits. They couldn't reinvest in the business and they failed because of it.
Yeah.
But again, we don't see that.
Yeah, because it's not algorithmically pleasing.
And those people don't go on motivational speaking tours to schools. And those people don't get held up by your parents as somebody to go look for. And I can look at it even in my own life. Like, I have one uncle who he's just started business after business after business, and all of them have failed. And he's a serial entrepreneur, is what he says. He makes enough money to keep himself going, but he's never hit it big. Then I got my cousin who started one business, and he's like, yeah, everyone should start a business. Well, he got lucky, right? Like he was at the right place at the right time. And, he started his business right after the Great Recession. So getting a bunch of construction equipment was cheap because everybody was selling it. Like you can't reproduce that environment anymore.
No.
But everyone looks at my cousin and was like, well, he did it. Well, I was like, yeah, he did it, but he also did it with cash. He also had an entire, he had my father who is, I kind of call him a jack accountant because he's not really an accountant, but he does all the bookkeeping and he's really good at it. He had his father who had been working for 60 years in the construction trades. It wasn't the same type of thing. But if we're looking at good debt, the bank is sitting there. How does the bank get paid? With the amount of money they loan you. So they're sitting there and they're saying like, oh, this is good debt. Take more, take more, take more.
Yeah.
And they're just damning business after business after business.
Yeah.
Schools are doing the same thing. You come in and they say, this is good debt. You're investing in your future, and they sell you this glitz and glam. It's not a thing. And then where do 18-year-olds typically go for advice?
Their parents and school teachers. Yeah.
And how do you think their financial pictures look?
Probably not great.
And of course, are they going to sit there and go, Johnny, don't be like me. Don't take on that debt. Don't sign up for their credit card. You're like, no, everyone believes that they're good. So they look at it and they go, well, this is normal to me. And I turned out okay. So you go, Johnny, you go. Right. Like that's what they say. And the banks, of course, have come into it. So the psychology here is that people, like you're getting bad advice every single place you look. And these people are confirming how you feel about it.
Yeah, that's so interesting. So from our conversation so far, the at the moment, the two biggest things that people can take away is what's your plan and what trauma are you bringing to your financial game, really. I think that's the two major things that you need to ask yourself. What is your plan? And as that example you used earlier, even if you did grow up in a fantastic home with parents, there's no perfect parents. You know what I mean? We're all slightly screwed up in a small way, one way or another, and that's okay. But what if we were to round it off to a nice free number, apart from what's your plan, deal with your trauma, but ideally through therapy, so that it doesn't affect your financial game. Is there anything else, any other advice you would give to an 18-year-old or someone coming out of university to deal with those societal expectations, to deal with this insidious monster that is debt?
Yeah, I mean, and it's a hard one because it's really ethereal to say like, oh, just understand that you've got something in your past that's continuing to make decisions for you without your consent. Right? That's hard. I'm almost 40 at this point, and I'm just now, in the last couple of years going, oh yeah, I really wasn't over that thing. you
Yeah.
know and I think for 18 years olds, like you get generally two types, right? The people who are going to replicate their parents' lives, right? Or the people who've decided that they're nothing like their parents and totally independent because they do everything exactly the opposite, right? I mean, the when it comes to debt, so like we gave the ethereal ones, like have a plan. Like if you're going to school for, where you have a high probability of getting a job and you know what the starting salary is going to be like, the debt is a means to an end, right? But it's not good. Like, let's not say it's good. When you're buying the house, don't think that the mortgage debt is good. We had an entire financial crash in 2008 because an entire generation of people thought this. The other thing that you can do is you can start actually educating yourself as to how this stuff works. As you put it out there, it's a beast. There's a societal expectation. Not a lot of people are going to figure this out before it's too late. So let's just, what are some things you can know? Number one, I already gave you a mentality. Understand that debt is a mortgage of your future life. Okay. Number two, I'd say understand that the people giving you debt do not have your best interests at heart, and they get paid by how much they give you. Right. Which is where the good debt thing comes in. Because why wouldn't you want to have more of what you think is good? And then number three, read the terms.
Yeah, 100%.
Read the terms. Let me give you a great example of what I mean by read the terms. Okay. And for an 18-year-old, they're going to think interest rate, and they've heard the term APR. I don't know if that's a thing in the UK.
It is, yeah, annual percentage rate.
Yeah. Okay. So do you know the difference?
No.
Okay. They're not the same thing. Okay. They're not the same thing. And that's really important. An interest rate is the amount of money that you spend on the money you borrowed.
Yeah.
Okay. An annual percentage rate is what the interest rate would be if we counted all the fees as interest payments.
Oh, right.
Okay. Let me give you an example. When you bought your house, if you pull out your mortgage documents, I don't know, again, I'm speaking from a US context, but if I pull my mortgage out and I look at my closing statement, it'll have my interest rate at the top, and then right next to it have APR, and the APR is slightly higher. Right. And what they're doing is they're calculating the appraisal fee, the inspection fee, the title fee, the closing fee, all those fees into this. And then saying, if this was interest payments, what is your real interest rate over the length of this loan? Okay. Where this is tricky is that for credit cards, there isn't a startup cost. I don't have to get an appraisal on my unsecured line of credit. Right. So they're the same number. But for a car, they won't be. Right. You see what I'm saying?
Yeah.
And for a house, they won't be. And why is that important? Because if your interest rate and your APR are very different numbers, it means that they made all their money by screwing you on fees.
Oh, right. Okay.
So this became law in the 80s because what they were doing was to say, oh yeah, this is a 1% interest loan. And people are like, oh, I mean, you have to remember early 80s, the interest rates in the United States were 17% to buy a house. Yeah. So a 1% loan, oh, that's great. But what they didn't tell you is that they had a origination fee for the loan that was like 40% of the loan that you had to pay up front. They were just prepaying the interest.
Yeah. That's
right.
A bit sketchy, but.
And so where do we see this a lot? Right. Where does an 18-year-old need to be aware of this? Well, buying a car, for one. If you go and you buy a used car, this is where they'll get you. But payday loans. I don't know what it is in the UK, but like payday loan stores here in the United States, what it is, you take your paycheck in and you say, here's what my paycheck is, but the next one hasn't come, and they give you a loan. And they don't charge you interest. They charge you a fee, right? Yeah. So if you're making $1,000, they're going to charge you a fee, and they say, well, the fee is just going to be $100. Okay. Well, that's a 10% interest rate.
Yeah.
And then they're going to charge you fees on top of that. And the APR on, the interest rate on a payday loan might be 10%, but then the APR is actually like 40 or 60%.
I've seen some, when they were advertised on the TV pre-COVID, you'd see the extra small writing at the bottom of the screen, like this is a 1,000% APR loan on on whatever you buy or whatever you take. I'm like, yeah, you're madness if you're it's absolutely crazy if you even thought about taking that out, but some people
But
did.
but here's the thing: they're preying on desperation, right?
Yeah.
Here's a very realistic scenario for an 18-year-old. You get to college, you get a credit card, right? Those bills start paying, piling up, so you get another credit card, right? You're paying minimum payments on the first credit card, and you get a second credit card, and then you hit the limit on that, and they finally cut you off, right? So within a year, you're $50,000 in debt.
Yeah.
Right now, your student loans, are kicking in at the end of graduation. So at the end of graduation, you get all your student loan payments plus your credit card payments. You're paying at 17% interest. Then you get that first job, and it doesn't quite go as far as you think it should.
Yeah.
Right. And now you're desperate because you're getting squeezed. And so where do you go? Well, I just need a little extra money to get to the end of the month. I got to hold some ends. Right. I got to hold some ends. And they go down there and they think, oh, it's going to be fine. I just need to do this one time. Right. And it's never one time. It's not designed to be one time. So, from an 18-year-old perspective, we're getting into the psychology again, but like read your terms, understand how this stuff works, right? Understand that people, understand what amortization is, right? What is amortization? Well, it's the payments over time, right? Understand the different, when you get a mortgage, you're not paying it all up front, right? But they give you what's called an amortization table. That's what your payments are. And in the beginning, you're going to pay a lot of interest. Why? Because in the beginning, you have a lot of principal. And if you don't understand the words principal and interest, that's a good place for you to start. Principal is the amount of money you took out in the beginning. Interest is the amount of money you pay for the privilege of having that money, right? It's the same thing with, understand how capitalization works. If you have an unsubsidized student loan, right, and you take that out your freshman year, you're like, oh, I'm not paying on it, but the interest might be capitalizing. And what that means is you owe them interest, but they allow it to increase the loan balance, right? So they don't charge it to you. They just give you, they just took the loan and made it bigger. And then they charge interest on that new, bigger loan that they then tack onto the loan. And then it gets a little bigger. And they're going to do that every month. And if you take out a loan for $10,000 when you're a freshman, your very first year at uni, for 4 years, it capitalizes. And by the end of it, that $10,000 loan is something like, $15,000 to $17,000.
Yeah. That's insane how it's so baffling to me that we just let kids loose into the world with none of this information. It's like, go and figure it out for yourselves. And by the time they have figured it out, they've made a litany of financial mistakes, or they're in too deep before they know it into some sort of financial debt, which they then need to get a job they hate to pay off the debt that they weren't aware of, that they could have avoided entirely. So I've actually got two questions. The first one actually I'd want to ask is, what would be your tips for paying off debt faster and more efficiently? So whether that's your student loans, car payments, whatever. Like, what if you're a student and it's all a bit overwhelming at this point, that you realize, crap, I'm in a minimum wage job, and I've through inexperience and not having any financial literacy have accrued a lot of debt, as people do. But what's the best way to pay that off, in your opinion, or a good place to start?
Well, the only place to start is to stop the bleeding.
Right. Okay.
You got to stop you got to stop the bleeding. You got to stop it, and that's going to come through budgeting. If you've never made a budget, you can go to fiscallysavage.com/tools. There's a free budget template in there. That my website's still up. And there's a balance sheet in there, but you have to stop the bleeding. You have to have a budget. You have to start looking at this. Budgets are not a poor person's tool. Okay. I hear this all the time. I'm not poor. I don't need a budget. Well, you're going to be poor if you don't. So you get to choose your hard, right? And I've heard people, well, I make enough money, I don't have to budget. Yeah, well, you're not as wealthy as you could be because you don't budget. Okay.
Yeah.
I'm, between my wife and I right now, I'm making more money than I ever have in my life. And I budget, and I'm anal retentive about it. But I've also watched my net worth triple in the last 2 years. Wow. So take that for what it's worth. So that's step one. If you're going to need to pay down debt, you need to budget. Okay. You need to budget. You need to start. And let me say this, as a financial coach and as a CPA, every one of your audience listening has complete blank check to screw up budgeting repeatedly for 6 months, but just try for 6 months. There is no God-given reason why you should know how to make a budget out of the box. We're human beings. We're meant to chase down deer and sit around campfires and hang out with other humans doing things humans do. We are not meant to budget. Okay. But it's part of reality. So anyone who starts this process, they're going to screw it up. And as long as I'm on the budgeting topic, budgets are living documents. You need a new budget for every single month. Okay. It's not a set it and forget it. Every month it's a new budget. When you get to, we're at the end of September at the time of this recording, next weekend, my wife and I will be sitting down. We'll be making our budget for October. Well, why do I do that? Because in October, I know I've got expenses. I got Halloween, I got kids, I got to get costumes. November's budget is going to have to include Thanksgiving dinner here in the United States. And December, of course, we have Christmas, right? Those 3 months are going to be different budgets.
Yeah. That's quite liberating as well, isn't it? It's that permission, so to speak, to fail, to take messy action. That if you screw up a budget, it's not the end of the world. At least you tried.
Well, you got to fail fast, fail frequently, and fail forward.
Oh,
that's the name of the game.
Snippet.
Right? Like you're not going to get it perfect the first time. The name of the game is to stop making your old mistakes and start making new ones. So if you're in debt, and to give you an example, I had a couple. They came to me for financial coaching, and we went through, and I did the whole thing where I set up the personal balance sheet. Let's figure out your net worth. Let's figure out what your picture is. And they were $500,000 in debt.
Oh my goodness.
And the point in which I started getting scared was when the wife looked at it and went, "Wow, we're doing a lot better than I thought we were. Holy shit. Where did you think you were? Wow. Whoa."
I cringed a little when you said $500,000 in debt. I think I'd weep.
Oh, they were so happy. They thought they were at least $1 million deep.
Oh, man.
And I was like, what are you? Wow.
Yeah.
And so I was like, no, like if you want out of this, like you have to start budgeting. And they had high income jobs, right? There's another great example. Well, they made enough money. They needed to budget. Well, yeah, then they ended up $500,000 in debt, but they screwed up their budget. I mean, they had a hard time learning it for about 6 months because they had to unlearn. And this is probably step number 2, unlearn all the shit that you brought forward.
Yeah.
Right. The ideas of scarcity, the idea that they couldn't say no to their son, the idea that if their son was ever disappointed, that they were bad parents, so on and so forth. And you had, they struggled at it. And then, I've been working with them for about 18 months. And now they're sitting there saying, I live a life where I have a lot less stress.
Yeah.
They're almost done paying off that debt after 18 months. But it had to, we had to start budgeting. And number 2, we had to deal with their psychology. I did a lot of psychological coaching, right?
Yeah.
So it seems weird, like, oh, well, stop the bleeding, get a budget. Now you're telling me to go to therapy? Yeah, I am. Hire a financial coach, hire somebody who can help you through this, and understand you're not alone. There's 1,000 people. Like I can I can walk down the street and be like, yeah, that person. I can walk through the parking lot of a grocery store and probably tell you half that person's story based upon how their car looks.
Yeah.
It's the Bentley with all the crap in the front seat. It's the lifted pickup truck when the guy's walking out with shoes he's been wearing for 2 years. And then number 3, so we've got, you got to look at your psychology.
Mm-hmm.
You got a budget is number 1. Number 2, you got to look at your psychology.
Mm-hmm.
And then that psychology piece leads to number 3. Okay. And this is where people will get really angry at me because I recommend this. But what you need to do is take all your debts. Do not look at the payments. Look at the principal. And line them all up from smallest to largest. And pay off the smallest one first.
Oh, okay.
Okay. And here's where people will yell at me. Well, but you're not looking at interest payments. You're right. I'm not. But you're not looking at how much money I spend over time. You're already up to your eyeballs in debt. We have that ship sailed. Okay.
Yeah. Okay.
You're not considering, what the debt was for. Maybe it was good debt. I've been over that. We've been over this.
Yeah.
Right. You start off with the smallest one for one very simple reason. It's a quick win. You're hacking your psychology. You want to see it win. If you looked at your largest debt, say it was $50,000 in credit card debt, and you're like, I'm going to pay it off first. It has more staying power than you do. Okay. You're going to be paying it off. You're going to feel like you're going to be making no progress and you're going to quit.
Yeah.
But if you pay off that first one, and then we have a credit card cutting party, right? And I've done this with clients. You line them up. We're paying off that first one first. They come on the Zoom call. They show me their balance. It's zero. We close the account online together. And then we get out of scissors and we cut up the card and we have this big celebration. I put on music. We dance around. Like, it's huge. And now they want that second win. So they go get it.
I
Right.
like it.
And then they get to say, now they've done it twice. And by the third time, their attitude goes from I'm buried under debt to I'm coming for you.
Oh, that's really good. Yeah.
So people will sit, and here's the problem. There's tons of people out there will sit there and go, well, get a debt consolidation loan. Just put it in a second mortgage. Fuck off with that.
Yeah.
Pay off what you got. You don't want to put in a second mortgage. You don't want to put your house at risk because of your bad spending habits in the past.
Yeah.
Right. If debt consolidation loan, go look at the APR on a debt consolidation loan. This goes back to understanding how it works.
Yeah.
Right. But the easiest way to not have to pay off your debt is to not have it in the first place. Don't go buy a new car. Don't go buy a new car. Go buy a used car. It will work just as fine. What do you need the car for? Just to get from point A to point B. Regardless of what people will tell you, your car is not an expression of who you are as a person. Yeah. Right? It's an expression of how you live your life.
Yeah,
it's a huge difference.
Oh yeah, that's there's some absolutely fantastic quotes in there. It's just there's so many I'd want to go over again, but I did say I had two questions, and the second question I wanted to ask was, if you're 18 and or coming out of university, of course they can check out your podcast at Fiscally Savage, and something I would like to chat about at the end is you're now starting a life coaching thing at the end, or you're starting a life coaching podcast movement, whatever, at the very end of the podcast. I think that could help people too. But what I want to ask is, what resources are available to kids, uni students, that they can check out by themselves? Like, is there any like really good channels on YouTube you'd recommend? Is there good books you would recommend? Is there a personality, a signed financial personality online that you would recommend? Because obviously they can check out your stuff, but when they've exhausted all your episodes and they can't exactly just call you up on a Zoom call.
No, but they can book an appointment with me.
There you go. We can talk about that as well.
Right. Yeah. Like if you go to Fiscally Savage, and to be fair, you already kind of let the cat out of the bag. The podcast I've stopped. Okay. Yeah. And I'm transitioning into more of a life coaching standpoint. We'll get into that in a little bit. But you can go to fiscallysavage.com and sign up for a consultation. Right. And you can, those range from several different things, everything from, people just like, I'm thinking about buying a car, talk me through the car buying process, to I'm applying for a job. I do job coaching to help people apply for jobs and stuff like that. So obviously I'm going to point to myself because I'm self-interested. But if you're looking for, so there's a couple of people. First off, Dave Ramsey is a huge resource. I think in his podcast and on his show, he's kind of I think he's lost his way a little bit because he's spending more time ranting about politics than he is about finances. But his book, The Total Money Makeover, is foundational, right? Like
foundational, very strong word.
Yeah. Just go get it, go read it, and then read it again. And on your 8th time reading it, you'll start to get it. So I think that he's a great resource. Chris Hogan's Retired Inspired is another book. Because he really the reason I like Chris Hogan's book is that he really goes into, why are we doing this? Like, once you hit financial independence, what are you going to do? Right. And in my case, like, I already know what I want to do. Right. I have a vision statement for myself, and I know that money is the way I'm going to get there, and I'm really motivated to do it. Right. And so I'm looking at it and going, I want to be able to be donating $2,000 a month to charity. Right.
Yeah.
I know I want to homestead my land. I know I want to have chickens and goats and take my daughter on horseback rides and stuff like that. Like, those are things that I want. I want to be able to go out and serve the community and help foster stronger men in this world. Those are things, but I need money to do it all. So Chris Hogan's Retired Inspired, Dave Ramsey's Total Money Makeover. And then the other thing that I would say is that, like, find people who are heading in the same direction you think you want to go. Okay. And the warning I'll put on top of that is to say, if it's really exciting, it's probably not where you want to be. So if they're telling you like, yeah, let's go out and you get the Ferrari, like, how do we get a loan for like, no, those people are bad. Don't know. But choose FI. So as in choose financial independence, choose FI. Those guys on that show are great, right? They talk you through financial independence, what it means, how you get there. I've learned a ton from them. And so those would be my 3 go-tos. Dave Ramsey's Total Money Makeover, Chris Hogan's Retire Inspired, and the Choose FI podcast and all of their associated stuff.
Fantastic. I'll be checking out some of those as well. Just to a note for the listeners, if this is your first ever episode or you haven't checked out season 1, Dylan did do our most popular episode of all time, how to do well in a job interview. So do check that one out. And in season 2, he also did do a very popular episode on how to professionally network. So go and check that out as well. And I've no doubt this episode is going to be just as popular as the other 2. It might be like my perfect trio of best performing episodes, no doubt. But that's all really good. Something I do want to very quickly touch upon before we end the episode is, and we were talking about this before the show, that when we were talking about professional networking in that second episode you did, you talked about obviously the professional side of getting a job and building your network, but then that naturally transferred to life coaching skills, and that naturally transferred to the psychology of why you want this and how to essentially be the best you can be. And I feel like this is so closely tied as well with what you've been saying throughout the entire episode. From the financial perspective, what, in a weird way, your financial situation, from what I've gathered, appears to be the symptom, and what's the underlying cause, in much in the same way the psychology of the child having a scarcity mindset or whatever. How, from a dare I say it, you're not a life coach perspective, what advice would you have in general terms for these 18-year-olds or university students who quite frankly don't have life figured out? And I'm not claiming to have life figured out.
I'm not either.
I just have more experience in winging it. From a lot of the life coaching stuff that you've done, what do you think would be the best advice you could impart upon a young man or woman?
Well, I guess the first question is, do you want me to tell the story I told you before we hit record?
Yeah, crack on. Absolutely.
So I mean, let's just get the soundbite of what's the best advice. Personal finance is more personal than it is finance. Okay.
100%.
Your trauma is making decisions for you without your consent. And I don't care who you are. Okay. You could have had perfect parents. They don't exist, but you could have had, the best parents, but you don't have perfect situations. You don't have perfect scenarios. You don't have perfect circumstances. It's just the way it is. When it comes to your money or it comes to life, your trauma, your unresolved trauma is driving the bus. Okay. And it's driving the bus in a way. If you are somebody who's had several relationships and they've all failed in the exact same way, guess what? The common denominator was you. And it was probably not even you making those decisions. It was probably a scared little boy or girl inside of you that had some experience you have yet to help them through. Okay. Money is one of those things people don't like to talk about it. They don't like to talk. You don't ask somebody how their sex life is. You don't ask them what's their net worth. Some people are weird and they talk about it. Some people get in groups and do it together. Like I know people who have budgeting groups and I know swingers. But when you touch on people's money, you're touching on their life. It's the resources that they use to live their life, which means it's intimate. Okay. And it's scary. And their parents did a horseshit job teaching them how to be good lovers, how to be good partners. And they did a horseshit job teaching them how to be good financial beings. Okay. I wouldn't have a side job doing life coaching and financial coaching if they had. Okay. And the story that I told, so, let's just now ground this into something real. The story I told Jonathan before we hit record. So I had this couple, and I never, ever, under any circumstances, will financially coach one side of a marriage, because all I do is create a divorce. Okay.
Yeah.
For all the aforementioned reasons, right? Like they're both bringing in their own shit into this relationship. But I'm sitting with the husband and wife, and we're halfway through the session. I charge $250 an hour. And
Yeah.
I just called a timeout and said, hey, what's going on here? You guys are not connected together. And I suddenly transitioned from financial coach into relationship coach. They had had an argument about their budget that had led to these other things. And now they're yelling at each other, and she doesn't think she loves him anymore, and blah, like, wow. Okay. We come to the end of the hour, and I say, look, I don't work for free. We can schedule another time, or you can give me money now. He just texted me the money. He just sent it to, like, no questions asked, just here's an extra $250. And so I'm like, okay, well, now I'm into this. And I kicked her out so I could just talk to the guy. And, from the context clues, I was kind of like, I think I know where this is going. So I just asked him, I was like, look, man, do you fuck your wife, or you just have sex with her? We started off talking about his budget. And now we're talking about this. And, in retrospect, it's one of these things where, like, that's a natural transition, right? That's actually not that unexpected, that we ended up there from talking about this other intimate thing that him and his wife have a hard time connecting on, and what was the problem? She's expecting him to lead. She wants a clear vision. She wants him to paint it out. She wants to help him bring it into being. That's what she wanted from him. And guess what? It was the same in the bedroom. Right. So, I gave him homework, and I told him, like, hey, here's how this is going to go. Next time you're intimate, like, this is what I recommend. Like, we went through the whole thing. I brought her in. I talked to her just by herself and went through the whole relationship coaching. I said, okay, I'm going to follow up with you in a couple of days. We'll see how it goes. And I texted them and said, hey, how's it going? And they just sent me $500 and said they wanted another session.
There you go.
So I transitioned. But here's the thing, Jonathan. Almost 90% of my financial coaching clients have become life coaching clients.
Well, there you
and
go.
It's because when we start talking about financing, like, stop and think about this from a budget perspective. I start looking at my budget. Then I start realizing my food. Oh, I don't want to eat out. It's really expensive. So but I don't know how to cook. Okay, now I have to have a conversation about cooking. Now we're going to have a conversation about food and what is emotionally satisfying for them. And then again, we just went right back to the emotions, didn't we? What's emotionally satisfying for them, what feeds them, what nourishes them on a food. Oh, and then, by the way, their healthcare costs with all these prescription drugs, that's out of control. So, if you lost a little weight, maybe, and now we're talking about fitness, aren't we? Now we're talking about, so we went from finance to food to fitness. Now I start sitting there and saying, like, okay, well, you're having a lot of streaming services, and we have bleed here elsewhere. How about some friends?
Oh,
right.
Oh.
What are you doing to connect with friends? Oh, I don't know. That's why I have Netflix. Oh, yeah. So you're using Netflix to numb yourself when you come home. And if we cut that out, we can keep that money for ourselves, and you get a better relationship. You can start fostering relationships with other like-minded people. Okay, so suddenly we go from friends, and they meet a girl. Now we're in fucking. Right? So, like, this is not, like, when you start touching on the money, you're going to touch on everything else.
Yeah.
And having the courage and the grace and dare I say it, the professional help to help you navigate that space is critical, which is why I'm starting the life coaching business.
Yeah.
Because I'm having a bigger impact there.
Yeah, 100%, man. And I'm excited for you. I must admit, when we started chatting earlier, it was the last thing I expected to hear. But I'm really I'm really happy for you, and, like, I'm super stoked for your success and all the future success you're going to have. And I'm afraid that's probably going to have to be the end of the episode. But, man, I just want to say thank you so much for coming on again. Like, every time you come on, I always leave these episodes smarter than I began. So well, definitely, like I said, I'd love to have you on at least once a season, just, for the amount of wisdom you can bring in both financial and, well, now life. So yeah, I really do appreciate you as a guest. And, at this point, I think you're coaching all the members of the Curious Ulsterman podcast. So thank you. So thank you very much, Dylan.
Thank you so much for having me. It's always a pleasure.
Yeah. Before we do sign off, where else can the audience find all your content? Like I know you mentioned Fiscally Savage and that. Is there anything else that they can direct them towards?
Well, right now we got fiscallysavage.com. I just started off my financial or my life coaching business will be called Savage Firelight, and you can find me on Instagram at Savage Firelight.
Fantastic. And I'll link that in the show notes as well. But once again, Dylan, thank you so much.
Thank you.